And we welcome you back to United in Liberty Radio. Dustin Harris and Joe Levis hanging out with you once again. Apologize for a little sabbatical last week. I had an opportunity to take a little trip with my family and head down south where it's warm and humid. And, Joe just wasn't willing to do a job. He wasn't willing to do the job that most Americans won't do while I was gone. No, and the truth is I locked the studio and took the key with me, so I apologize about that, Joe.
Might have been afraid of what I might go out and say, while you were gone.
Are you saying I did that on purpose?
I don't know. I may have done this. I may have done it on purpose, just because
because you don't trust me, or you don't trust you.
Just an hour by myself, man. I'll talk about everything.
It could be scary. Hey, we welcome you back, though. It's interesting. I want to just chat with you a little bit about this last week. Had an opportunity to travel a little bit to see some family down in great state of Texas. And Texas, is an interesting state. You've got metropolitan Dallas-Fort Worth, which is where I spent a little bit of time. That's where my sister lives, and had an opportunity to visit with her and her family. I do not like the big city. I apologize to you listeners out there who live in the big cities, but, the traffic congestion and, there's some pros and cons, but mostly I would say cons. But Texas is full of wide open spaces as well, and we had an opportunity to visit some of those as well. But, a couple things, Joe, that, kind of struck me this last week as I was in Texas. Two things really hit home to me. And number one was the pride, and I mean that in a good way, not a bad way, but the pride of the people with their state down there in Texas. Have you had a chance to visit Texas, Joe?
Not in the last few years. I spent some time visiting there with family over the last, as I was younger, growing up, but I haven't been there in quite some time. But what you do read about, and you can get a sense of the pride that people feel with what's going on in the country. And for a while there was a lot of question about whether or not Texas was going to leave the union just because of what's been going on.
Right.
And it's a lot of people out there that really love their country and they understand. I think I don't want to generalize and say the entire state. I'm sure there's people that are, unprincipled in every state, but just as a general observation in my mind, it's just a group of individuals that really love their country and have a lot of pride in the country as a whole.
Right. We had an opportunity, as the listeners know, we do homeschooling in our family, and before we went down to Texas, we had an opportunity to do a little study about Texas and a little Texas history. But before I get into that, the interesting thing was I saw the Texas flag almost as much, if not more, than the United States flag. I have to say, if a secession comes, I believe it's probably going to start in Texas. In fact, my sister was asking me when I was going to move down to Texas, and I said not in my lifetime. No offense to our Texas listeners, but again, I just don't like the big city, and I like where I'm from. But she said, well, what if we secede from the nation? I said, well, I might think about getting a second home there. We'll see. But, it is interesting, the difference. And, one of the things that really struck me, this was one of the two things that struck me, was I wish that across the country other individuals had as much pride in their state as Texans do. They truly are proud to be Texans. You drive around where you and I live, Joe, and across the country, and sometimes you will see businesses and other individuals flying the American flag, and sometimes they'll just be huge flags. You'll get these flags that are, sometimes 30, 40 feet wide and that much long, and flying across, their place of business there. I saw that several times in Dallas with the state flag, and I thought that was cool. I don't see that with other states. One of the things that I think has probably perpetuated that a little bit, a little history for the listeners. I'm sure you're aware of this, Joe, and probably most of our listeners are as well. But Texas is the only state in the Union that was actually an independent country for a while. The sovereign nation of Texas for a few years in the 1800s, and that was interesting to learn a little bit about. I'm sure that perpetuated things, but which led into the second observation that I made when I was down there, and that is. I went down with expectations to really. One of the things that we did was travel down to San Antonio, and I had an opportunity to go visit the Alamo. I was excited to visit the Alamo. There's a lot of history there, but one of the things that I relearned, I guess, was reminded of as I got down there, and as we in our homeschool had an opportunity to study, was the history of the Alamo. And some of the listeners may be interested to know that the Alamo isn't all it's cracked up to be. And sometimes I think we get in our mind, the "Remember the Alamo" cry, and we remember, Bowie, and we remember Davy Crockett, who fought the Alamo, and there in the Great War against the Mexicans, and sometimes we get in this mindset that we were Americans defending our homeland. Well, that wasn't exactly the way things were. In fact, at that point, the Alamo actually sat on the sovereign nation of Mexico. One of the interesting things in one of the books that we read was to find out that, in the beginning, people were coming from the Old West, not necessarily from America, because most of that area was not, quote-unquote, United States yet. And I'm talking, now the states of Oklahoma, Nebraska, Nevada, Arizona, even up into Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, those areas, people would fluctuate down to Mexico because Mexico had a written constitution. And frankly, that constitution was patterned after the United States Constitution. It was actually a pretty good place to live there for a while. And then what started happening was, because it was a good constitution and because Santa Anna wanted to keep it a sovereign nation, these individuals started sneaking across the border, started sneaking into Mexico, coming in illegally. It got to be such a problem that Santa Anna decided to start kicking them out, and that's actually what perpetuated the war. Sound familiar?
Are you saying that's where we're headed?
Another
war?
I'm not saying we're headed to another war, but it's interesting. The state, we think and we get prideful as Americans, and even Texans might stand up and say, "Remember the Alamo, and look how vigorously we fought for our homeland." Well, they were really kind of taking over a land that wasn't theirs, unfortunately. And I'm not saying that the Mexicans at that time were saints. There's things that happened on both ends, including a great slaughter just a few weeks after the Alamo that I think was despicable on the Mexicans' end. But these individuals, the 300 plus that were in the Alamo, defended the Alamo. It wasn't exactly the way that they tell you when you get to the Alamo. And they tried to perpetuate that. And I knew the history, but I guess I went down there thinking that I would be proud to be an American walking through the Alamo. I would feel a spirit of pride, of patriotism, and it just didn't come to me. I actually enjoyed the river walk in San Antonio much more than I enjoyed the mud hut that they call the Alamo. So.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, a bit of history. I mean, as anybody spends any time delving into U.S. history and how things came to be and different aspects, as the birth of the United States as we now know it. There's a lot to learn, a lot to go on. I mean, a lot that goes with it. I think it's interesting though. You bring up this fact that you have these individuals who are fighting fighting this war essentially because which started because they broke into or they illegally crossed a border. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot of individuals now. Fast forward to 2010, and you have individuals, unfortunately, who are looking to that as an example or pattern. And quite frankly, there are a few that I've heard that they call for some type of revolution against the United States, because now the United States, by way of Arizona, is now enforcing its immigration laws, which it's interesting to see, and there could be several debates headed either way, but I have to wonder, the picture now is really not like it was back then, in the sense that you go back to that time, you had individuals who were industrious, who were self-reliant, who would be able to provide